and this base is on lock. So your base ends up looking patchy, cakey, oily, and creased sometimes almost immediately after you finish it. Well, in today's video, I am going to help you achieve your most flawless looking foundation base yet. It's going to be so flawless, you will not need a filter. Now, before we jump into it, two things first. Make sure your lips are moisturized and actually taking your sponge over to the sink. Run some water over it to make sure that it gets very wet and very plump. You are going to squeeze all of the water out and then set it aside on a clean paper towel or on a sponge holder. And let's get started. Before I do any makeup routine, I make sure that my skincare is done. So I've cleansed my skin, I've done my toners, my serums, my moisturizers, and my SPF sunscreen or my SPF moisturizer. Preferably, you're doing your makeup immediately after your skincare routine. If not, we're going to start out with a moisturizer. This step will make sure that your skin is hydrated, and if you have oily skin like me, it's not going to produce excess oils to try and combat that dehydration in your skin. So once you apply your moisturizer, it's going to help your skin produce less oils. Looking up while you're doing anything on your under eyes is going to be our BFF in this routine. So anytime you have to do something on your under eyes, just remember to look up. So anytime you apply anything to your face, you have to give it a few seconds to just go ahead and settle down. That way it doesn't interact wrongly with the next step that you're going to do. When I started doing makeup, sometimes my foundation does not stay on my face, especially on my nose and on the highest points of my cheek. It was because I didn't know that I needed to prime my skin. It wasn't until I went to pick up my very first primer, and it was actually sold by Benefit. It was a Perfection, that I was able to stop my foundation from slipping off my nose and the highest points of my cheek. So the very natural next step in any foundation routine is to prime your skin. There are so many different primers. Look, the primers reacted with my SPF. There's so many different primers out now that you can choose the perfect one for your skin type. Although I have oily skin, I still like to use a hydrating gel primer because it helps my skin stay hydrated, and it also helps me keep my oils at bay. Because of how tacky and how sticky these gel primers get, they hold onto your makeup for a very long time. I love blending in my primers with my fingers because it warms up the product and makes sure that it fills in all the pores, all the fine lines and wrinkles, and it also helps it just go over and settle in between all the texture. This is going to help us achieve the most flawless filter looking skin possible. Definitely make sure that you're also applying some of the primer on your under eyes, and like I said, make sure you're looking up while you're applying anything on your under eyes. And now we'll just give it a few seconds to settle down. Dry it down until you don't feel that cold, cool sensation. That's how you know your primer is dried down. This next step is not only for hiding your dark circles. For me, I like to add a little bit of a color corrector on my under eyes to help later on down the line. I'm actually using a liquid blush on my under eyes as my color corrector. You're gonna notice that there's a lot of products that I like to use in several different ways because you cannot possibly have one product for one specific thing when you can just use the same product to do other things. To blend this in, I'll be using a blending brush. This is a brush you can use on your eyes as your eyeshadow brush, but it also works perfectly for blending anything in detail, especially on your under eyes. This is the brush set that we're using today. I will link it down below so you can check it out. If you have any discoloration on your face, this is going to be the time to go ahead and color correct everything. Next step, I am a firm believer that the Benai colorless powder is a makeup girlie's BFF. The reason being, it doesn't have any actual color to it. Even though it's a white powder, you can use it to set your eyes, you can use it to set your face. It's not going to distort the look of your makeup. Now, during this part of the process, you're going to take a big fluffy powder or face brush that's not going to concentrate too much of the powder in one specific area. You're going to go into your colorless powder and you're going to set your whole entire face, including the parts where you just put your color corrector. If you have oily brows like I do, definitely make sure you're setting your brows. As you can see, the powder definitely mattified my face, but it did not change the actual tone and color of my skin. Essentially, it didn't add any extra color to my base. If you watch my previous videos and you picked your correct color for your foundation, this is where you're gonna go in with said foundation. I like to put a few spots on my face, just making sure that I put the same spots on either side of my face. We're taking the sponge that we dampened and squeezed all the water out at the beginning of the video, and we're using the broad side of the sponge, or I like to call it the butt of the sponge, and we're going to blend everything in. You're just going to pat at it. You're not going to drag it. You're going to just bounce the sponge on your skin, hence the term beat that face. This motion is going to help spread and blend your foundation in a very beautiful, seamless way. One thing you're going to notice that I'm not doing is blending the foundation on my under eyes where we put our color corrector. I'm going to blend the foundation all around my under eyes, but not actually on my under eyes. Now here's a tip that nobody actually ever mentions to you. Don't move your face as you're blending anything past your powder. Anything past after we set our face with our powder, don't scrunch your face. Like, don't move your face as much as possible. I know I look crazy right now, but this is why I'm going to tell you to trust the process, okay? It will come together later. So this is where you have a decision to make. Do you want that more natural coverage looking base, or do you want a fuller coverage base? Now, if you're somebody who likes that full coverage beat, just give this foundation a few seconds to settle and dry down, and then you're going to go in with a second layer of your foundation. Remember, the name of this game is to give everything a few seconds to settle and dry down before we go in with a second layer. If you picked the right shade of concealer, this is what you're going to go in with. The good thing is color correcting your under eyes does not only obscure the depth on your under eyes, it also helps brighten your under eyes when you put concealer on it without needing a very bright concealer. Next, I will go ahead and put a few lines of the concealer on my forehead, like a little tail feather. Merge everything in the middle and just pull it down the bridge of my nose, top of my lip, and also on my chin. This dimension of putting concealer on to bring the brightness and the attention down the middle of your face. Next, I like to use the rounded side of a sponge to blend in my concealers. Depending on the kind of concealer you're using, if it's a mattifying concealer, you might want to just go ahead and start blending it in. If it's a natural soft matte concealer like the one I'm using right now from Fenty, you can give it a few seconds to dry down before you go in and blend it. You can also have a mirror and look up as you're blending it. That way you can see that you're blending on your under eyes as close to your lash line as possible, making sure that you're blending into any creases and lines you might have on your under eyes. Anytime I'm blending on my under eyes, I pinch the sponge a little bit and blend, and it gives you a more precise blend. The patting motion applies to blending in your concealer as well. Next, we're gonna go in with our setting powder. I find that because the sponge it's not really wet, it's only damp, right? You can feel it. It's like damp to the touch, but it doesn't have any actual water in it. Because the sponge is damp, it helps the setting powder set in such a way it looks so much like a filter. I like to use the flat side of the sponge to apply my setting powder. We're gonna go in with our colorless powder because it's going to be that one product that you can buy that can help you mattify your face. It can also help you set your concealer without adding any unnecessary shades or tones to your foundation. The number one rule when it comes to under eye makeup is going into effect right now. Do you see how flawless and filter looking my under eyes is right now? It looks like I have a filter only on my under eyes. We're going to repeat the same process on all the parts of our face that we used our concealer. For this powder, don't be afraid if you get it all over your face because it's colorless. It's just going to mattify your base, and this is just going to be like an extra reinforcement layer of powder. Next, we're taking our contour or bronzer depending on your skin tone, and we are going to use a fluffy brush. It doesn't have to have this specific angle as long as it's not too compact and it's moving removable, you can use that. Just go into your product and you see the top of my ear, where the top of my ear is. I'm gonna trace that line down, and that is where I will put my contour, and we're just gonna blend it over there. Because of how big this brush is, it's going to blend in the product so that it's not a sharp line, and it's also going to blend it just right to where it's going to fall exactly where the line forms when I purse my lips. Of course, you always blend up your product, so we're gonna make sure that we are blending just where that line is, but also just making sure that everything is going up. Take a little bit of that product and run it on your hairline. Essentially hide any lines of demarcation that you might have if you didn't have the right shade of foundation. Can you see a difference in my face from me looking at you? You can see that the side where I put the bronzer, it's looking lifted, it has more shadow, it has more character, and it's looking also leaner compared to the other side of my face that does not have the bronzer yet. And if it helps give you a visual, purse your lips, like do the duck face so that you can see where the hollow of your cheek is, and make sure you stop right there and just pat it in. Now, if you're able to pat in all your products the right way, it's not even going to ruin whatever edges you've done. Like, I literally pat some product over, and because I'm patting it in, my edges are not ruined. Now you can go ahead and contour your nose. I generally don't like to use the same shade of contour on my nose as my face, but there's a way that you can do it to make it look good if you're using the same shade of contour. Take a fluffy blending brush, tap into your contour. Go ahead and take some off on the back of your hand by just running the brush on your hand like this. And then you'll go in and contour from where your brows start in the middle, and just try to run down the brush as close to the middle part of your nose as possible. Make the line like so, all the way down to the tip of your nose. But we don't also have to see a straight line, because that just looks like you didn't blend in your contour, and we don't want that. When I look at you, you can see there's more structure to this side of my face compared to the other side. Now we're gonna go in with the blush. You can use a cream blush or you can use a powder blush. Let's go in with the cream blush because I did say that it can serve multiple purposes, so let's do exactly that. Okay, I'm taking this almost dome brush, blending the blush in on the back of my hand first, and then I'm going to apply it to the highest point of my cheekbone. I'm not gonna drag it down, I'm not gonna drag it up, I'm just gonna blend it directly on the highest part of my cheekbone. Don't be afraid to blend it into your contour or your bronzer, because the whole point of everything is to look seamless and blended in. Blend into your contour and also blend into the sides of your face. That way the edges are soft and blended in with everything. Blending the blush on the highest part of my cheekbone literally makes this side of my face look like I'm smiling. Take the rest of whatever is left on the back of my hand, and I like to apply some blush to my hairline because I feel like it gives me this more halo blush look. It's not a lot of blush, but it gives a nice warm look to my face. Feel like you're going to overdo it with the blush. And I'll take a little bit more of the blush and just put it on the tip of my nose. I also like to apply a little bit of it on my lip. Okay, next we're going to take our contour and we're going to snatch the jaw a little bit. Just tap slightly, and you're going to contour from the side of your ear just along your jawbone. It's not supposed to be a line, just to snatch your jaw, okay? This is how you can also hide that your foundation is not exactly your shade. If you want to have a more snatched cheekbone area, you can take some of your setting powder and use the powder side of our sponge. Take some powder from the top of your lid, okay, and you can run it right under where you put your contour. This will help clean up your contour. Tap it in so that it can blend it out. Now before we go in and set everything, I like to just apply some powder to the parts of my face that I know will get really super oily, essentially around my nose and around my lips. And I just like to run the sponge across my nose to absorb any oil. oils. And now we're ready for our setting spray. You can go in with a mattifying setting spray if you have oily skin like I do, and this will help keep your base oil free for as long as possible. If you have dry skin, or if you're like me, you have oily skin but you still want the hydrated look, you can go in with a dewy or a hydrating setting spray. Today I'm gonna go in with both. I literally just now sprayed the hydrating one on my skin, which is why my skin is looking so blended in, and I use the hydrating one to help everything blend in before we go in with the mattifying one. The mattifying setting spray has powders in it, so it's actually going to add more powder on top of the powder I already have, and I don't want my face to get too powdery, hence the hydrating first before the mattifying one. Here we go. After all this, you're going to take the powder side of your blending sponge and you're just gonna run it all over your face. We're just gonna blend everything in. This is our finished look. It's given skin, it's given filtered look, it's giving my face has now melted off and will be looking really good for the next few hours. 6 hours later and my face has not been blocked, not one bit. My lips are gone, my base is still on, flawless and filter perfect. Once you master this and you can do this with your eyes closed, then we can say it is time for you to add on to it, to experiment with several different products, several different shades. You need to make sure that you have your base on lock, and this base is on lock. If you need a tutorial on how to do your brows, eyeshadow, or your lashes, then definitely check out these two videos because they're going to help you get your whole face together.